Tonight, before you drift into rest, I invite you to settle in as a gentle question softens the mind. What traces remain of people who walked across a world of ice, and why do their footprints feel so quiet now? As you listen, you may feel your shoulders loosen, your breathing slow, and perhaps the soft suggestion of warmth from an imagined campfire beside you. Let the calm guide you, and allow this peaceful curiosity to prepare you for sleep as we ease into our opening story. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? I always find it comforting to imagine a quiet thread connecting listeners from many corners of the world. And before we go further, if you enjoy gentle history like this, you're welcome to tap like and subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps this small channel grow, and I truly appreciate your presence here. As the cold world of the Ice Age stretches before us, imagine a landscape so wide and so silent that even a whisper seems to float for miles. The people who lived here left marks so faint that, today, they are almost invisible. Their shelters softened into the earth. Their tools slipped under layers of soil. Their stories, carried by generations, turned into quiet echoes. Tonight, we'll follow these fading traces, calmly and without rush. In these early moments, picture a group of travelers moving across frozen plains. They walk with simple purpose, seeking food, warmth, and safety provided by the one who controls the seasons. Their steps press into snow that melts, refreezes, melts again, until time gradually wipes away the edges. What remains is not a clear path, but a gentle suggestion, a reminder that people once lived here, just as we live now, hoping, working, and adapting. Let your mind breathe with the rhythm of the lost landscape. The Ice Age was not a single moment frozen in time. It changed slowly, day by day, as the world shifted under the guidance of natural forces. Humans adapted to these shifts with patience, moving when they needed to, resting when they could, and adjusting their lives to the cold that shaped everything around them. Every so often, as you listen, allow yourself a small release of tension. Your jaw unclenches, your hands relax, and the quiet story settles around you like a warm blanket. The world of ice might feel distant, but the people who walked through it were grounded in the same human experience: effort, caution, and resilience. Imagine their temporary shelters, simple structures built to withstand freezing winds. These shelters weren't meant to last. They were designed only for the moment, giving protection through the night and then dissolving back into the land after the people moved on. The world covered their remains with snow, soil, and time, until only hints remained for us to discover. And here, in the quiet of your room, think about the softness of that idea. Humans living lightly on the land, leaving only small footprints behind. It's a comforting thought in its own way, a reminder that not everything in history was loud or monumental. Much of human life has always been simple, calm, and quietly determined. Every couple of minutes, I'll remind you gently, you don't need to stay alert. Let these images drift. The story will continue at its own pace, whether you're awake or comfortably slipping into rest. Your only task is to breathe and listen. Picture now a trail of footprints across a frozen river. The trail leads from a cluster of small shelters to a nearby hunting ground. The prints are uneven, some crisp, others softened by wind. They tell a story, not in words, but in small impressions. A group walked here. They carried tools. They moved together, a family or a band of companions. And after the season changed, the river melted, and the prints faded into memory. If you listen closely to this imagined world, you might feel the slow rhythm of life back then. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. The cold shaped their days, guiding when they traveled, hunted, or rested. Each decision was gentle and practical, shaped not by ambition but by survival and care for one another. A soft thought returns. How many traces have been lost beneath centuries of snowfall and soil? What we find today is only a tiny fraction. Most of their world returned quietly to the earth, guided by the natural processes created by the one who governs all creation. This disappearance isn't tragic. It's simply the way time carries things forward. Let your breathing settle again. You might notice your eyelids growing heavier. That's perfectly fine. The calm rhythm of the story is meant to slow your thoughts and ease your mind. We are moving through history at a gentle walking pace, never hurried. Imagine that, in the distance, a faint glow of firelight flickers, perhaps a family gathered after a long day. They sit close, sharing warmth, speaking quietly. Nothing dramatic, just simple human connection, surrounded by the vastness of the frozen world. Their voices rise into the cold air and disappear, leaving no mark except the memory of a calm night. Another soft reminder, you don't need to hold on to every detail. Let whatever stays, stay. Whatever drifts away can drift. The story is here to soothe you, not to demand attention. As the Ice Age travelers continue their quiet journey, their footprints stretch toward the horizon, only to be covered by snowfall soon after. This slow erasing of their presence is the heart of our segment, the fading of lives lived with purpose, but without the permanence humans often expect. Their legacy is in their resilience, not in monuments. In the next part, we'll keep following these soft, vanishing traces, exploring how entire communities lived and moved in a world carved by ice. But for now, allow yourself to rest in this quiet landscape, where each step fades gently into time. As we continue, imagine the early morning light slowly spreading across the frozen plains. The air is cold but calm, and somewhere in the distance, the last traces of yesterday's footprints soften under a thin layer of frost. This gentle fading reminds us how human presence in the Ice Age was quiet, practical, and never meant to leave deep marks on the land. The people who traveled through these regions carried only what they needed. Simple tools, warm clothing crafted from what nature provided, and knowledge passed down through experience. They moved lightly, guided by the seasons and the search for food and safety. Their lives were shaped by their surroundings, molded by the cold winds and long nights, all under the watchful care of the one who controls time and weather. When we look for their remains today, we find only fragments, a tool knapped from stone, a hearth darkened by use, or a few animal bones left from a quiet meal. These fragments whisper, rather than speak. They encourage us to imagine, not to assume. Much of what they left behind dissolved naturally into the earth, returning to soil as gently as snow returns to water. Take a slow breath and allow the rhythm of this fading world to settle your mind. There is something soothing in knowing that life once moved at such an unhurried pace. Nothing rushed, nothing loud. Just small groups of people adjusting to the cold and finding comfort in each other's presence. Sometimes, when excavators uncover a piece of Ice Age history, they discover footprints preserved in ancient mud. These rare finds show not only where people walked, but how they walked, some prints close together, others spaced apart, suggesting children moving beside adults. These moments allow us to glimpse tenderness, daily life, and the small human details that otherwise disappear with time. A gentle reminder, you don't need to stay fully alert to follow this story. Let your thoughts drift naturally. If your mind wanders, that's part of the experience. This calm rhythm is meant to soften your awareness, not sharpen it. Now picture a small group gathering around a fire, sheltered from the wind by a simple structure of wood and hide. The flames offer warmth, not by their own power, but as a means created by the one who provides heat through natural forces. The light dances softly across their faces, turning the icy night into a place of shared comfort. Their conversations are quiet, practical, and perhaps full of small hopes for the next day. When morning comes, they tidy their space, take what they need, and continue their journey. The shelter remains behind, but by the next season it will be partially buried. By the next year, almost completely. And within a few decades, it becomes part of the land again. What we call disappearance is simply nature returning everything to balance. Let your breathing slow once more as we follow their path. Footprints stretch across the snowy ground, then fade into patches of earth where the wind has swept them away. Every few steps tell a story, and every story dissolves softly into the landscape. There is peace in understanding that history is mostly made of these quiet moments, ordinary people living ordinary days. Not every civilization leaves grand structures or detailed records. Some leave only the memory of their presence in the soil and the tools they shaped with their hands. Every couple of minutes, I'll remind you gently, let go of any pressure to stay awake. The story is here to accompany you, not demand your attention. Rest is welcome. As the world warmed, these small communities moved with the changing land. Their old paths were covered by new vegetation, their seasonal camps swallowed by rising waters or shifting terrain. Nothing dramatic happened to them in an instant. Their way of life simply changed, softened, and transformed over long stretches of time. This transition marks the final chapters of their footprints, steps taken across melting ice, steps taken into new forests, steps taken into unfamiliar but promising territory. And with each step, the traces behind them grew fainter, blending into the earth beneath. In this quiet ending, we don't arrive at a dramatic conclusion, but instead at a gentle understanding. The disappearance of Ice Age footprints reflects the natural flow of human life across changing landscapes. What vanished physically remains as knowledge, a reminder of resilience and patience. As you rest now, imagine those faint footprints slowly softening into snow, their stories settling into stillness. Let that stillness help you drift, calmly and peacefully, into whatever rest awaits you tonight. Along the frozen coastlines of the Ice Age, the first light of day moved quietly over stretches of ice, frost, and pale ocean mist. These coasts were once home to small human groups who lived close to the water's edge, following the rhythms of tides, winds, and migrating animals. When we imagine these early mornings, we can almost sense the calm routine of their days, the crunch of snow underfoot, the soft flap of hide coverings on simple shelters, and the slow crackle of a fire rising into the cold air. These peaceful scenes help us understand how entire communities survived on the very edge of land and sea. The coastlines they depended on no longer exist in the same form. As the world warmed and the seas rose, many of those settlements were swallowed by water, leaving only hints beneath the ocean floor. But in their time, these shores were abundant. Fish swam close to the edges. Birds nested along rocky outcrops. The water provided food and tools, all granted through the natural order set by the one who governs creation. Every day began with a patient walk along the ice, searching for signs of movement, a ripple, a track, or a patch of open water. Picture a small group standing at the shoreline, wrapped in warm clothing shaped from materials available to them. Their tools were simple: bone-tipped spears, carved hooks, and nets woven from natural fibers. They watched the sea with careful eyes, understanding its patterns. Their knowledge came not from written records but from long observation, learning which areas froze first, which cracks suggested danger, and where the waters brought more life. Even in such a cold environment, the coastline offered surprising variety. In some seasons, the ocean receded just enough to reveal tidal pools filled with shellfish. Families would gather quietly, each movement steady and deliberate to avoid slipping on ice-smooth rocks. These small gatherings formed much of their daily routine, shaping a life based on steady repetition rather than sudden change. Every few minutes, allow yourself to settle deeper into the calm of this imagined world. You don't need to remember every detail. Let the rhythm slow your thoughts gently. The people here lived in a similar rhythm, soft, controlled, unhurried. Their days were guided by daylight, weather, and the simple intention to care for one another. Imagine their shelters arranged near the shore, built from driftwood, stone, and hides. These structures were strong enough to resist the wind, yet light enough to be moved when conditions changed. Over time, storms and tides erased these shelters, leaving almost nothing behind. Their disappearance wasn't dramatic. It was simply part of the natural cycle of land meeting sea. When the sea froze into wide sheets of ice, it became both a barrier and a pathway. People walked across it to reach better fishing spots, always listening for the deep, distant cracks beneath their feet. They moved slowly and carefully, trusting their senses and experience. The frozen ocean was not frightening to them. It was familiar, something they understood intimately. Take a slow breath here, feeling the same calm they might have felt when watching the sunrise over the frozen horizon. They didn't rush their mornings. They prepared their tools, checked their surroundings, and moved as a group. Everything they did was steady, deliberate, shaped by the demands of the cold and the wisdom of past winters. The coastline also served as a meeting point between groups. When resources were plentiful, different families might share a stretch of land, exchanging small pieces of knowledge. Where seals rested, when fish migrated, how the wind shifted before a storm. These exchanges were simple and practical, rooted in survival rather than ambition. Many of the traces these groups left behind are now far below modern sea levels. Archaeologists searching for signs of their presence must look not across open land but beneath the water. What they find is often minimal: tools washed smooth by currents, stones arranged in ways that suggest purposeful placement, or remnants of fires preserved under layers of silt. As you listen, let your mind drift like the tides that once shaped these settlements. Each rise and fall of the water marked time for the people who lived here. Their routines followed this rhythm, gathering when the sea provided, resting when storms came, moving when the ice thinned. The frozen coastlines were not harsh prisons. They were living landscapes filled with opportunity for those who understood their patterns. Families could thrive here with patience, skill, and deep respect for the environment around them. Everything they used, food, materials, shelter, came through the pathways created by the one who sustains the natural world. Another gentle reminder: you don't need to stay fully alert. Let the soft cadence of the story guide your thoughts, easing them into quieter places. The people of this era lived in a similarly peaceful mental space, attuned to nature rather than overwhelmed by it. Consider how their children learned these skills. They followed adults to the shoreline, watched them test the ice, listened to explanations of tracks and waves. Learning happened through calm demonstration, not hurried instruction. Over time, these small lessons formed a deep understanding of the coast and all it offered. As the day stretched onward, the coastline shifted subtly, ice melting, tides pulling back, winds changing direction. These quiet changes shaped every decision the community made. They didn't fight the environment, they moved with it, adapting continuously and leaving behind only faint marks that time would eventually erase. As the afternoon light softened, the frozen coastline revealed more of its quiet secrets. Shadows stretched across the ice, creating patterns familiar to the people who lived beside the sea. They knew how to read these shadows, how they hinted at changes in the wind, the thickness of ice, or the movement of animals nearby. Nothing in their world was random. Everything held meaning if you paid attention long enough, and their survival depended on this patient observation. In some seasons, small groups traveled farther along the coast in search of new fishing grounds. They packed lightly, carrying tools crafted with care and knowledge refined over generations. Their journeys were slow and steady, marked by frequent stops to study the ice or test the safety of a frozen inlet. These coastal migrations left almost no permanent footprint. When storms arrived, the wind erased their tracks within hours, leaving the land clean and undisturbed. Allow yourself to take a slow, calming breath as we follow them across these icy paths. Imagine the sound of the wind moving gently across the open expanse. The people here were accustomed to it, its rhythm, its temperature, even the way it rose before a storm. In that sense, the coastline was like a teacher, guiding them through each season, offering lessons that shaped their daily lives and long-term decisions. When they stopped to rest, they often built temporary camps near rocky outcrops. These rocks provided natural shelter, blocking the strongest gusts of wind. Fires burned low and steady, not by their own strength but because natural laws allowed heat to gather and spread. Families gathered around these small fires, sharing warmth and stories of the day's journey. Their conversations were simple and practical, shaped by the need to plan for the next sunrise. The rising and falling tides determined much of their schedule. When the water pulled back far enough, it revealed stretches of coastline rich with shellfish. People moved carefully across slippery stones, collecting what they needed while watching the horizon for signs of shifting weather. These routines created a calm rhythm, predictable, steady, and deeply connected to the natural world around them. A quiet reminder returns: there is no need to stay alert. Let the gentle flow of these scenes soften your mind. The people who lived this life embraced slowness, allowing the environment to guide their pace rather than rushing against it. Their patience was not a choice but a way of life, woven into every movement. Imagine their return to camp as evening approached. They carried their gathered food with practiced efficiency, knowing exactly how much to take and how much to leave untouched. This balance ensured that resources remained available season after season. It was a form of wisdom that required no written system, just careful attention and a sense of responsibility for the land. As darkness settled in, the coastline transformed again. The sea reflected the faint glow of the moon, and the ice crackled softly in the distance. People settled into their shelters, adjusting hides to keep out the night air. Inside, warmth gathered gradually, wrapping the small families like a protective blanket. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, only the natural rise and fall of life along the frozen shore. By the time the first stars appeared, the coastline felt almost timeless, though never truly still. Beneath the surface, the tide continued its cycle. Beyond the horizon, winds shaped new patterns in the ice. These subtle shifts were part of a world always in motion, even when it seemed silent. The people understood this and accepted it with quiet resilience. Every few minutes, let yourself drift a little more, just as they drifted into rest after long days of work. The gentle rhythm of the sea helped them sleep, offering a steady backdrop that eased the mind and softened worries. Their sleep was light yet restorative, guided by the cold but comforted by the warmth provided through the natural order set by the one who sustains all creation. In the deep of night, small movements continued around them. Animals traveled along the edges of the ice. Distant cracks echoed across the frozen sea. These sounds didn't disturb the people. They were part of the familiar music of the coastline, a reminder that life endured even in the coldest, quietest places. When morning approached once again, the cycle renewed itself. The people rose, stretched, and listened to the coastline with attentive calm. Another day awaited them, shaped by the same ancient forces. Wind, water, ice, and the unspoken knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Their presence left faint traces, yet their lives held meaning in every step, every choice, and every careful moment of adaptation. And so, the frozen coastline continued to support them, quiet, vast, and ever-changing. Its gifts were temporary, its beauty subtle, and its lessons constant. Though much of what they built has vanished beneath rising seas, the memory of their peaceful existence lives on in the rhythm of the land and the stories we piece together from what remains. As the Ice Age began to warm, the world changed not with sudden chaos, but with a quiet shift, soft enough to go unnoticed from one day to the next, yet powerful over generations. Imagine standing on a wide frozen plain as the first hints of warmth settle across the landscape. The surface of the snow glistens differently. The wind feels slightly less sharp. Nothing dramatic, yet something is happening beneath the stillness. This slow transformation shaped the lives of countless communities and set the stage for a completely new world. The melting began in small, subtle ways. Snow that once stayed firm throughout the year started thinning during warmer months. Streams formed where there had been only frost. Animals migrated earlier or later than expected, confusing familiar routines. People living in these vast icy regions noticed the signs through calm observation. They understood the land deeply, and when something changed, they felt it even if they could not measure it or give it formal names. As you imagine this world shifting, allow your mind to soften as well, settling into the same unhurried pace that guided the people of that era. Their days became a balance between adaptation and patience. They watched the ice recede along riverbanks and coastlines. They noticed new plants pushing through soil previously hidden beneath layers of frost. Each of these changes required adjustment, yet the people moved with the land instead of resisting it. Rivers once frozen solid throughout the year began to flow more often. The sound of running water, rare for generations, became a familiar companion. Families would pause near these streams, studying their patterns. Flowing water offered new opportunities for fishing, new pathways to travel, and new challenges to consider. It was as if the land itself was slowly waking, stretching after a long slumber shaped by cold. Every few minutes, allow your breathing to slow. Let the imagery of shifting snow and gentle water carry your thoughts. The people back then lived with the same sense of gradual change, accepting each new shift with calm resilience. Their lives were connected to nature's rhythm, and the changing seasons felt like a quiet conversation between humanity and the earth. Forests grew where once there had been only open tundra. Small shrubs appeared first, followed by taller grasses, and eventually trees that stood against the warming sky. With this new vegetation came new animals, creatures adapted to milder conditions. People learned to track them, understand them, and adjust their hunting practices. It was a new chapter in survival, guided by patience and careful learning. Shelters also changed. Instead of relying solely on materials suited for extreme cold, families began experimenting with new resources. Wood became more plentiful as forests expanded. This allowed them to build stronger, more lasting structures, though still simple and respectful of the land. The shift created a sense of stability that had been impossible during the harshest phases of the Ice Age. Imagine standing near one of these early settlements, feeling the mixture of old cold winds and new warm breezes moving through the trees. The air carried a blend of scents: melting snow, damp earth, and the faint smell of pine. For people who had known only cold plains for generations, these new sensations must have felt strange, yet quietly hopeful. A soft reminder returns: you don't need to follow every detail closely. Let the story flow around you like the gradual change in the landscape itself. If your mind drifts, that's perfectly natural. This narrative is meant to ease you gently toward rest, not keep you fully alert. With each passing decade, the climate shifted one small step at a time. Lakes formed where glacier had once stood unmoving. Valleys emerged as the ice receded. People found new pathways to travel, exploring areas that had been unreachable for centuries. Their knowledge of the land expanded not through sudden revelation, but through continuous observation. Animals that once dominated the frozen plains slowly moved northward or vanished entirely. Large creatures, suited for extreme cold, found it harder to survive. Their gradual disappearance challenged communities to adjust again, finding new sources of food and new methods of gathering. These transitions were neither abrupt nor destructive. They were simply part of the natural order set into motion by the one who governs creation. As evening arrived in this changing world, the sky often held colors unfamiliar to the people of earlier generations. Warmer air created softer sunsets, with hues of red, orange, and pale gold spreading across the horizon. Families would pause in their tasks, watching the colors reflect off melting ice and flowing water. These calm moments offered reassurance that adaptation was possible, even when everything around them slowly transformed. Over time, their movements became less tied to strict migration cycles. With more plants, more water, and more stable weather patterns, groups could settle for longer periods. They built larger camps, crafted more durable tools, and began forming small communities rooted in shared experience rather than constant travel. These settlements marked the beginning of new cultural paths that would define future generations. Even in moments of uncertainty, they remained grounded in the steady pace of nature. They listened to the land. They learned from each small change, and they adapted with quiet determination. Their story is not one of sudden disappearance or dramatic transformation, but of a slow, gentle shift into a world no longer shaped entirely by ice. As the warming continued, the land revealed new layers of soil that had been hidden beneath ice for thousands of years. These fresh stretches of earth were rich and dark, ready to support life. Plants that had never grown here before began to take root. Families who passed through these areas paused to examine new leaves, new colors, and new textures in the landscape. Each discovery brought an unfamiliar sense of possibility, a gentle reminder that their world was quietly rewriting itself. They soon learned that different seasons required different rhythms. Winters remained cold, but no longer held the same unbroken severity. Summers stretched longer, with softer breezes and more abundant food. People shifted their routines to follow these new cycles, waking earlier, traveling at different times, and adapting their shelters more frequently. This was a world in transition, and they moved with it instead of resisting the change. Every couple of minutes, allow your thoughts to drift gently. The story moves slowly, just as the land changed slowly. Nothing here asks you to stay fully alert. Let the shifting landscape soften your mind, the same way it softened the rigid ice that once defined the horizon. Streams that once froze solid each winter now flowed year-round. Their gentle sounds became a constant companion for many groups. The flowing water shaped new paths across the land, carving channels into the soil and leading people toward unfamiliar regions. Communities followed these streams as if following a thread, trusting that water would guide them toward new opportunities, new food sources, and safer places to stay. As forests expanded, they brought new forms of life: birds that sang in warmer seasons, animals that grazed in open meadows, insects that hummed quietly at dusk. These sounds must have felt strange to people who had known only the silence of snow for generations. Yet the unfamiliar did not frighten them. Instead, it reminded them that the world was offering new gifts, each one emerging as the natural order shifted in balance. People adapted their tools to match the new environment. Stone blades were shaped with different angles to handle wood instead of ice. Spears were adjusted for different prey. Nets were woven differently to suit rivers rather than frozen coastlines. These changes were small but constant, creating a slow evolution of daily life that mirrored the landscape's transformation. Among these changes, families began to explore deeper inland. They found valleys rich with plant life, gentle hills untouched by wind, and wide lakes formed from melted glacier. These new regions gave them places to settle longer, hunt more efficiently, and raise children with stability previously unknown in the harshest Ice Age years. Each step inland added another layer to their growing understanding of a warmer world. Take another slow breath and let it release naturally. Just as these early communities breathed in the scent of thawing earth and melting snow, you can let the imagery of this shifting world guide you toward calm. The melting Ice Age was not rushed. It unfolded like a slow exhale, reshaping the land with patience. As the land warmed, some routes once used for generations became unnecessary or even impassable. Frozen rivers that had served as reliable highways were now flowing waterways that required different strategies to cross. Groups that once met frequently along shared paths now moved in separate directions, following new landscapes that suited their needs. These subtle shifts gradually reshaped human connections and social patterns. The changing seasons also influenced the way they stored food. Where once they relied on natural cold to preserve supplies, they now built small storage pits, shaded shelters, or used flowing water to cool their resources. They learned these methods through trial and observation, guided continually by the natural rules set by the one who governs all creation and provides sustenance through the world he designed. As nights grew milder, families spent more time outside their shelters. They observed the stars, listened to the soft movements of animals, and spoke quietly about the changes they saw. These conversations weren't dramatic. They were thoughtful, steady reflections born from living close to nature. Their understanding of the world deepened with every season that passed. And so, the melting world carried them gently forward. One warm breeze, one new plant, one shifted migration at a time. Their lives were woven into this transition, shaped not by sudden events but by the patient unfolding of the Earth's new rhythm. In these moments, the people of the Ice Age stepped into a future they could not fully imagine, yet they moved with calm resilience, trusting the land to guide their way. As the world warmed and vegetation spread across formerly frozen plains, many groups who once lived as constant travelers began to sense a new possibility: the chance to stay in one place a little longer. It didn't happen suddenly. It began with small decisions, pausing for a few extra days near a river rich with fish, or remaining in a valley where plants grew thick and animals lingered. This gentle shift, born from changing seasons, laid the foundation for communities that felt more anchored than ever before. The choice to remain in one place for longer periods brought a new rhythm to daily life. Instead of packing and moving each time resources shifted, families experimented with storing food, strengthening shelters, and learning the patterns of a single landscape. They discovered that the land, now warmer and richer, could support them for months rather than days. It was a quiet transformation, made not through bold declarations but through ordinary moments of practicality and observation. With each passing season, People noticed that familiar paths used by migrating animals now crossed closer to their temporary camps. New plants grew in predictable cycles. Rivers retained their flow rather than freezing solid. These steady patterns encouraged families to create more lasting structures, shelters reinforced with wood, stones arranged with care, and boundaries marked to protect against winds and animals. As you picture this new stage of life, allow yourself to settle into the same calm they must have felt. Their movements slowed. Their days became more centered around shared tasks, repairing tools, preparing meals, tending fires, and watching over children who now had more stable ground beneath their feet. Life no longer revolved solely around survival. It began to take on the shape of routine. Groups who once traveled separately began to stay near each other for longer periods, forming the beginnings of shared spaces. Multiple shelters stood in clusters, arranged to create small pockets of community. People exchanged knowledge more frequently: how to store food safely, how to track seasons, how to use new materials offered by the warming land. The act of staying put brought them closer, creating bonds built on cooperation. Every few minutes, let your thoughts drift gently. The pace of this story mirrors their pace: slow, steady, and patient. Nothing moved quickly in this world, yet everything was changing beneath the surface. As people observed the land, they learned that stability could be just as valuable as mobility. Their shelters became more sophisticated. Instead of simple portable structures that could be dismantled quickly, they began building stronger frameworks using wood from the expanding forests. They added layers of insulation, placed stones to hold heat, and shaped entrances to protect against winds. These improvements didn't just offer comfort, they represented a new mindset, the belief that a place was worth investing in. With stability came the opportunity for more complex crafts. People carved tools with finer detail, experimented with new forms of clothing, and created simple decorations. These creations reflected care and time, something difficult to achieve when constantly on the move. Life in a more settled setting allowed creativity to unfold naturally. Children who grew up in these emerging communities experienced the land differently from their ancestors. Instead of learning to navigate vast migrations, they learned the names of local plants, how to read the soil, and how seasons shaped the valley or riverbank where they lived. Their sense of belonging was tied not to wide open territories but to specific places they knew intimately. The decision to stay longer in one place also changed how families prepared for the seasons. They built small storage pits, adapted shelters for both warm and cool months, and planned ahead based on patterns they observed over time. Their relationship with the land deepened, becoming more interactive and thoughtful. Imagine the evenings in these early settlements. Fires burned steadily outside. People sat near their shelters, watching the sky shift colors as the day faded. Their conversations grew richer, filled with reflections about changes in the weather, new animal tracks, or the first sprouting of a plant they hadn't seen before. These quiet exchanges formed the roots of a growing community identity. A gentle reminder: you don't need to stay fully awake to follow this. Let the slow evolution of these early communities ease your mind. The calmness of their new routine reflects the calmness you can settle into now. With more people staying together for longer, shared tasks became more common. One group might gather wood, another prepare meals, another craft tools. This cooperation strengthened bonds and reduced the daily burden on individuals. Life felt a little lighter, a little more predictable, shaped by collective effort rather than constant relocation. Over time, these clusters of shelters grew into small hubs, nothing like later villages, but unmistakably more structured than temporary camps. Pathways formed naturally between shelters. Communal areas emerged where people worked and talked. Fires burned longer into the night, offering warmth and light that brought families together. These early settled communities represent a profound shift in human history, not dramatic, but deeply meaningful. They reflect the moment when humanity began to see land not only as something to move through, but as something to live with, season after season. As seasons continued to shift and the land grew more inviting, these early communities discovered something new: the comfort of returning to the same place year after year. Even if they moved during colder months, They often came back to the same valleys, riverbanks, or forests when conditions improved. This sense of familiarity created a gentle emotional connection to specific landscapes. The place was no longer just land. It was something known, predictable, and quietly reassuring. Staying in one place for longer periods also changed how families organized their days. Instead of waking every morning uncertain about the next destination, they focused on building routines. Some prepared food, others shaped tools, and others gathered materials for construction. These habits brought structure to life, giving people a sense of rhythm that softened the uncertainties of the natural world. Stability, even in small amounts, transformed their daily experience. Every few minutes, allow yourself to settle into this same rhythm. The movement of these communities mirrors the movement of your thoughts, slow, repetitive, and calming. They didn't rush, and neither must you. Their world expanded gently, shaped by patience rather than pressure. As the population grew, people began experimenting with different ways to organize their space. They placed shelters in thoughtful locations, near water, near wood, or slightly elevated to avoid flooding. They created simple pathways between dwellings. Objects used frequently were stored in shared areas. This emerging sense of structure signaled a new stage of human cooperation, where individuals relied on each other more deeply. With more permanent shelters, families could preserve their belongings more easily. Tools no longer needed to be lightweight and portable. People began crafting more refined equipment, sturdier axes, sharper blades, and containers woven from plant fibers. These objects lasted longer and reflected an evolving expertise shaped by the environment around them. The shift towards settlement also allowed people to observe patterns across multiple years rather than relying solely on immediate experience. They noticed which plants grew at certain times, which animals returned to specific areas, and how weather patterns influenced food availability. This long-term understanding made their communities more resilient, guiding future decisions with quiet wisdom. At night, these early settlements glowed softly with multiple small fires, each one illuminating the faces of people who now shared more than just survival. They shared stories, work, and a growing sense of belonging. The calm hum of voices filled the air, blending with the crackling of firewood. For generations accustomed to constant movement, this new stability must have felt deeply comforting. A soft reminder returns. Let the quiet nature of this transition cradle your thoughts. Just as these communities eased into a slower way of living, you can ease into rest as the story continues to move at this gentle pace. Some groups even began marking specific locations as important landmarks. A large tree, a particular rock formation, or a reliable stream became reference points for navigation and gathering. These markers held practical significance, not symbolic worship, simply features of nature that helped structure their expanding world. As they spent more time in these chosen areas, people formed deeper connections with neighboring groups. They exchanged materials, techniques, and observations. These interactions strengthened social bonds and reduced conflict, as cooperation became more beneficial than competition. Over time, these alliances helped ensure survival during harsh seasons or unexpected changes. Children growing up in these communities knew stability in a way earlier generations couldn't. Their games took place along familiar pathways. Their learning happened through watching adults work in the same locations year after year. They listened to stories tied to recognizable landscapes, grounding their sense of identity in places they could point to and walk across. With the expanding stability came the first hints of planning beyond immediate needs. Communities prepared for next season's arrival by reinforcing shelters, storing food more effectively, and mapping areas rich in resources. This foresight marked the beginning of a shift toward long-term thinking, one of the foundations of future civilizations. The communities weren't fixed or immovable, but they were no longer purely nomadic. They moved when needed but returned to favored places with intention. Their lives balanced mobility with rootedness, guided by what the land allowed and what experience taught them. And so, through small decisions and gentle adaptations, humanity took its first quiet steps toward settlement. The world was still wild, unpredictable, and governed by natural forces, but people learned to shape their lives around these rhythms. slowly, patiently, and with a calm resilience that echoed through generations. In the early days of the melting world, humans shared the land with enormous creatures that shaped the rhythm of their lives. These animals, towering, fur-covered beings built for deep cold, moved across the plains with steady, thunderous steps. For generations, people learned their habits, watched their migrations, and adapted their own movements to match the patterns of these great animals. Yet as the world warmed, something subtle began to change. These companions of the ice started appearing less often, their trails growing faint, their presence slipping quietly into memory. The first signs of their decline were easy to overlook. Perhaps a familiar herd didn't return at its usual time. Perhaps tracks that were once deep and frequent appeared shallower, fewer. People noticed these hints through calm observation, sensing that the land's balance was shifting. They didn't know why the animals changed their patterns, only that they did. And in a world where survival depended on understanding nature, these shifts carried deep significance. As you imagine these early days, let your thoughts settle into the slow rhythm of the story. The people who lived through this change experienced it gradually, just as you're hearing it now. Their relationship with Megafauna was not built on dominance but coexistence. The animals provided food, materials, and guidance, benefits granted through natural means created by the one who governs all creation. Yet humans took only what they needed, following principles of balance. Megafauna shaped entire landscapes with their movements. When they grazed, they cleared paths. When they migrated, they carved routes across snow and soil. People walked these pathways long after the herds passed, trusting the animals' instincts to guide them toward water, safety, and fertile land. These creatures were not mythical beings or objects of worship, merely remarkable creations woven into the natural fabric of the Ice Age world. As the climate warmed, the Megafauna faced challenges they had not evolved to handle. Forests expanded into areas once covered by open plains. Ice thinned, reducing the stability they relied on. Plants they once depended on grew scarce or were replaced by unfamiliar species. These slow but persistent environmental shifts placed enormous pressure on animals adapted for extreme cold. The disappearance of these creatures wasn't dramatic. There were no single events that marked their end. Instead, the decline was felt in the calm passing of seasons. Fewer sightings, quieter landscapes, footprints fading before fresh snow fell. Families noticed these absences during hunts or long walks across the tundra, exchanging quiet remarks about herds that once seemed endless. Every few minutes, allow yourself to drift gently with this sense of slow change. The world of the Ice Age softened in temperature, and the stories of its animals softened too, slipping further into memory with each passing decade. Just as your thoughts move at a natural pace, so did the shift that reshaped the relationship between humans and the great beasts. In some places, people followed herds farther north, trying to maintain old patterns. They walked for days, crossing rivers and hills, only to discover that the herds had moved beyond reachable distances. Their hunting practices adjusted accordingly, not out of urgency, but through calm necessity. They sought smaller prey, gathered more plants, and worked with the land's new offerings. These changes were neither abrupt nor catastrophic. They unfolded steadily, like the slow melt of a glacier. People adapted because adaptation was part of life. They shifted their tools, their expectations, and their understanding of what the land could provide. Each adjustment became a stepping stone toward a new way of living. Despite their size, the Megafauna left surprisingly faint traces behind. Bones scattered across ancient plains, occasionally preserved by cold soil. Carved images scratched gently into ivory or stone, depicting animals once familiar to everyday life. These remnants speak softly across time, offering only hints of the deep connection between humans and the creatures they lived alongside. Imagine a family standing on a quiet ridge, looking across a landscape once filled with movement. Silence stretches where the wind once carried distant footsteps. There is no fear in this silence, only reflection. They understand that the land, shaped by forces beyond their control, continues to change, and they must change with it. A gentle reminder, You don't need to absorb every detail. Let the calm flow of this world ease your thoughts. The quiet loss of these great animals mirrors the quiet pace of this narrative, steady and soft. As the megafauna dwindled, people expanded their skills. They crafted different tools for smaller animals, learned new ways to gather plants, and explored areas they once overlooked. This expansion of knowledge became essential for survival, guided always by the natural order that provided resources through shifting landscapes and seasons. By the time many megafauna species vanished completely from certain regions, humans had already adapted. They carried the memory of these animals through stories, simple observations, not legends or worship, and through the tools they left behind. These memories remained woven into their understanding of the world, shaping how they approached the seasons and responded to change. And in this gradual disappearance, we find a story not of loss alone, but of transition. The animals that once defined the Ice Age slowly stepped back from the world, making space for new life, new challenges, and new ways of living that future generations would carry forward. As the presence of megafauna faded from daily life, the people of the warming world found themselves standing at the edge of a quiet transition they never intended but naturally accepted. The great herds that once shaped their movements were no longer reliable guides. Paths carved by massive animals slowly softened into the earth. Trails once beaten into snow and soil disappeared beneath grass, shrubs, and young trees. Without these ancient companions, the landscape felt new, open for exploration yet unfamiliar in shape. People soon discovered that smaller animals, birds, and seasonal plants played a greater role in survival than ever before. They followed different trails, listened for different sounds, and studied the land with new attention. This shift didn't bring fear, it brought learning. Adaptation became a patient teacher, guiding each generation toward new skills that fit the warmer world. Families taught children to recognize fresh patterns, the movement of deer, the tracks of small mammals, and the timing of newly sprouting vegetation. Let your mind drift gently with this change, just as they drifted with shifting seasons. The decline of large animals was not an abrupt end but a slow passing, allowing communities time to adjust. Their tools reflected this transition. Spears designed for giant creatures gave way to smaller, lighter designs. Traps were refined with careful craftsmanship. People crafted baskets for gathering, sharpened smaller blades, and shaped tools for cutting softer wood rather than tough frozen landscapes. Even their shelters took on new forms. Without the need to follow fast-moving herds across vast plains, families could strengthen their dwellings more confidently. They gathered more wood, reinforced structures for milder winters, and placed their camps in locations suited for plants, water, and smaller animal herds. These changes created spaces more connected to the land's rhythm than to the movements of any single species. Some communities maintained memories of the megafauna through simple markings carved into bone or stone, quiet records of what once walked the earth. These carvings weren't symbols of worship or sacred devotion. They were observations, moments captured so the younger generations would understand the past. They served as reminders of how the land had once looked and how people had adapted to its earlier challenges. As years passed, the disappearance of megafauna reshaped the social fabric of human groups. No longer centered around massive seasonal hunts, gatherings shifted toward cooperation in gathering plants, fishing, and hunting smaller game. These tasks could be shared more evenly among members of all ages, creating a different balance of responsibilities within the community. Every few minutes, let yourself breathe into the softness of this evolving world. The people of that time breathed the same way, slowly, thoughtfully, accepting that the land continuously changed, shaped by forces beyond their control yet always offering something in return. Long after the megafauna vanished from many regions, their influence remained in the ways people understood distance, movement, and time. Old migration routes became pathways for human travel. Former hunting grounds turned into places for gathering or settlement. The memory of those animals lived on not in monuments but through the land itself, carried quietly through each generation's knowledge. Some elders would point toward distant hills or open plains and describe how the earth once trembled with the steps of great creatures. Children listened with curiosity, imagining animals they would never see. These oral memories served as gentle bridges between past and present, grounding communities in an understanding of how life shifts with the world. As the landscape continued to warm, new opportunities emerged. Rivers swelled, meadows widened, and forests grew dense. The people stepped into these environments with steady confidence, blending old knowledge with new observations. They no longer relied on massive animals to guide their movements. Instead, they followed the voice of the land itself, its sounds, its patterns, its quiet instructions. And so, the story of the vanishing megafauna became part of a greater narrative, a story of adaptation, resilience, and the gentle passing of one era into the next. The great animals left footprints that eventually faded, but they also shaped the paths humans followed long after their own presence slipped into history. Beneath layers of soil, sediment, and quiet time, the tools of ancient people rest like gentle whispers of lives once lived. These tools, simple, practical, shaped by patient hands, tell stories that the land itself carried for thousands of years. When we imagine them buried under shifting earth, it becomes clear how human presence often fades softly, leaving behind only small reminders of resilience and resourcefulness. These remnants were not created to last indefinitely. They simply survived because the land cradled them as seasons changed. Each tool begins with intention. A stone chosen for its sharp edge, a bone selected for strength, a piece of wood shaped by careful pressure. These objects were made to solve immediate needs, cutting hides, scraping plants, carving grooves, shaping shelters. In the hands of their makers, they served everyday purposes, guided by skills passed down through careful observation and practice. They were not decorative treasures or symbols of status. They were essential instruments shaped through patience. Imagine a quiet scene, a person sitting near a fire, holding a piece of stone between steady hands. The sound of tapping echoes softly against the cold night air. Sparks of grit fall to the ground as the edge sharpens. This simple rhythm, tap, adjust, shape, formed the backbone of survival. The one who created the natural world provided the resources. Humans applied skill and effort to turn them into tools that supported daily life. As you picture this process, allow your mind to settle into the same slow, repetitive pace. Ancient toolmaking was never rushed. It required stillness, focus, and calm. The makers learned to read the stone, understanding which direction it would break, how much pressure to apply, and when to stop. Their knowledge came not through theory but through years of practice etched into muscle memory. Once completed, these tools were carried across frozen landscapes, tucked into belts of hide or stored in simple bags made from natural fibers. They traveled with families as constant companions, used for gathering plants, preparing food, carving wood, and building temporary shelters. With each use, they carried marks of wear, subtle scratches, chipped edges, smooth surfaces that told stories of countless tasks. Every few minutes, let your thoughts drift with the quiet humility of these ancient objects. They were never meant to impress or endure forever. They served, they wore down, and finally, they were set aside when a new tool was needed. Their disappearance into soil was natural, a soft merging with the earth that once provided their raw materials. Over time, layers of sediment covered these discarded tools. Rain washed soil over them. Plants grew above them, their roots weaving through the ground and gently pressing objects deeper. Seasons shifted, snow melted, rivers changed course, and slowly the world folded these tools into its layers. What remained were fragments, slivers of stone, shaped bones, smooth handles from long-gone wood. Archaeologists uncover these quiet remnants by chance. A piece of stone discovered near a riverbank. A carved bone revealed after erosion. These findings offer glimpses into ancient craftsmanship. They show how people adapted to their environment with creativity and focus. They remind us that even the most ordinary objects hold meaning when viewed through the lens of time. Picture a tool buried just beneath the surface, still intact after thousands of years. The person who once used it may have placed it down intentionally or dropped it unknowingly during a journey. They had no expectation that it would last. Yet the soil preserved it, protecting it from decay and carrying its shape forward into the future. These small discoveries help us understand how early humans lived, not through grand monuments, but through quiet evidence of daily labor. A sharpened blade tells of hunting or preparing hides. A bone needle reveals the need for clothing and shelter. A shaped piece of wood might have been part of a simple frame. Each tool is a clue, a gentle connection between past and present. A soft reminder, you don't need to follow each detail closely. Let the rhythm of this slow uncovering guide your thoughts, just as the land guided these tools deeper into its layers. The story itself is like archaeology, steady, careful, unhurried. The creation of tools also shaped community life. Knowledge passed from one person to another, strengthening bonds between generations. Elders demonstrated techniques, while younger hands practiced under watchful eyes. These exchanges built trust, patience, and shared understanding, qualities that allowed communities to thrive in a world shaped by cold and change. And so, each tool carried more than function. It held stories: who made it, who used it, how it traveled, where it was left. These stories may not have been spoken, but they're woven into the object's very shape, preserved by earth and time. The land remembers even when people move on. As centuries passed, more tools slipped quietly beneath the earth, carried by shifting winds, melting snow, and growing vegetation. Some were left behind intentionally, worn pieces no longer sharp enough to be useful. Others fell during travel, unnoticed in the moment and soon covered by the settling ground. Each of these tools became part of the land's slow memory, hidden in places where no human foot would tread again for thousands of years. People moving across the changing landscape rarely looked back to see what they left behind. They focused on the moment, finding food, staying warm, guiding their families. They trusted that the land provided what they needed and carried only the essentials. If a tool slipped into the soil, life continued without pause. In this way, the earth collected countless remnants of their daily routines, preserving them unintentionally. Every few minutes, allow yourself to drift with this gentle sense of time. Just as the land works slowly and patiently, shaping layers that settled over ancient objects, you can let this story settle softly in your thoughts, without urgency or expectation. Some tools were buried near former riverbanks. As water levels rose or shifted, old campsites disappeared beneath silt and sand. When rivers carved new paths generations later, those hidden tools remained locked in place, forgotten until erosion revealed them once more. This was not a story of dramatic ruin, but of nature continuously reshaping itself, tucking away pieces of human history in quiet corners. Other tools became trapped under the growth of expanding forests. Roots wrapped around them, pressing them deeper into the soil. Fallen leaves layered above, gradually transforming into rich earth. The forest floor became a natural archive, storing objects that once sat in the hands of people long gone. Each layer formed gently, season after season, preserving fragments of ancient lives without intention. As communities became more settled, the number of tools left behind increased. People crafted more, used more, repaired more, and discarded more. Near the edges of early settlements, archaeologists today sometimes find clusters of discarded flakes from stone carving, tiny shards that formed during the shaping of blades and scrapers. These clusters reveal where someone once sat, carefully striking stone, shaping a tool with patience and skill. Imagine the quiet of that moment, the slow tap of stone against stone, the sound echoing across an open plain or beneath the cover of forest branches. The person shaping the tool focused not on the future but on the task at hand. Their work created fragments that fell into the soil, fragments that now help us understand their craft. Even these small remnants carry stories. The deeper archaeologists dig, the more they encounter tools from different times layered on top of each other, each layer representing a moment in history shaped by climate, migration, and adaptation. The Earth does not sort these objects by significance. It simply covers them naturally, creating a timeline written in soil and stone instead of words. With each tool uncovered, we learn more about how early humans solved challenges. A sharpened blade shows how they processed food. A bone needle reveals the making of warm clothing. A polished stone hints at long hours of craftsmanship. Together, These objects paint a picture of communities shaped by patience, effort, and reliance on the natural order provided by the one who sustains all creation. A gentle reminder, you don't have to stay fully focused. Let this slow uncovering of ancient tools guide your breathing, the way archaeologists gently brush soil away from an artifact. Soft, steady, unhurried. Even though these tools lie silent, they speak through their form. They show how ancestors adapted to cold and warmth, scarcity and abundance, change and stability. They show how every generation built upon the knowledge of the one before it, quietly, consistently, without any sense of grandeur. Survival itself was their achievement. Some tools remain forever hidden, resting in layers no one will ever reach. They are part of the earth now, joined with the soil that once supported the people who made them. These unseen remnants hold value not because they are discovered, but because they represent lives lived with intention and resilience. In the end, the story of ancient tools is not about the objects themselves, but about the hands that shape them, the minds that imagined their use, and the land that preserved them. These tools, buried in time, remind us of the quiet continuity of human life, how people worked, adapted, and trusted the world around them, leaving behind traces that whisper softly from beneath the ground. As the world continued to warm and familiar landscapes transformed, people began drifting outward across vast regions, following gentle clues written into the earth. These migrations were not dramatic escapes or sudden movements. They were slow walks guided by curiosity, survival, and the steady rhythm of the seasons. Families traveled across open plains, through young forests, and along the edges of rivers that carved new paths through the land. Step by step, they pushed into territories unfamiliar yet quietly welcoming. Every migration began with observation. People noticed when herds shifted, when plants germinated in new places, when water flowed in different directions. These signs suggested opportunity. A valley where grass grew thicker, a coastline where fish gathered, a riverbank offering shelter from wind. Migration wasn't a decision made in haste. It was a response to the land's changing voice, understood through patient attention. Imagine a group preparing to travel. There is no rush. They gather tools, carry food, and adjust clothing crafted from materials nature provided through the natural order shaped by the one who governs all creation. Their movements are steady, their conversations calm. Children walk alongside elders, absorbing knowledge through observation. Each footstep creates a moment in a journey that may span seasons or generations. As migrations unfolded, pathways formed, not carved intentionally, but created through repetition. As more families walked the same routes, the ground hardened slightly, plant life bent, and landmarks became familiar guides. These trails, shaped by human footsteps rather than grand intentions, stretched across continents. They were not roads, but quiet lines connecting one landscape to another. Every few minutes, allow your breathing to soften, mirroring the gentle pace of these early migrations. The people of that time did not measure distance by urgency. They measured it by daylight, weather, and the comfort of the group. Movement was life, and life flowed with the environment. Migrations were rarely linear. Groups wandered in curves, adjusting to rivers, mountains, and shifting food sources. Some paths led to lush meadows. Others brought them to colder regions where ice lingered longer. They learned these new areas slowly, testing the soil, studying animal tracks, and listening to the wind for clues of approaching weather. Each discovery shaped their decisions, teaching them where to settle briefly and where to continue onward. During long journeys, families often camped near water. The sound of flowing rivers provided calm, while fish and plants offered nourishment. These places became temporary resting points where people repaired tools, gathered strength, and shared stories of the land behind them and the land ahead. The world during migration felt vast, yet each night brought a sense of shelter through nature's blessings. Imagine them looking across distant horizons. They didn't know what lay ahead, yet their steps were steady, guided by trust in their skills and their understanding of the land. They moved as communities, not isolated individuals, supporting one another, sharing burdens, and teaching younger members how to read landscapes with attentive eyes. Over time, these migrations connected distant regions. Knowledge flowed along these human pathways. Groups that met exchanged simple techniques: how to build stronger shelters, how to prepare certain plants, how to cross rivers safely. These exchanges weren't formal. They were natural outcomes of shared survival, shaping broader networks of understanding. A gentle reminder: let your mind drift with the calmness of this movement. Just as these ancient travelers found peace in the steady rhythm of walking, you can find rest in the steady rhythm of this story. Some migrations lasted only a few seasons before families returned to familiar areas. Others continued across great distances, reaching new environments with different challenges. When people encountered forests, they learned to navigate dense canopies. When they reached mountains, they found passes shaped by wind and melting snow. Each new region invited adaptation. Children took their first steps along these routes, learning the world not as a fixed place but as a landscape in motion. They remembered where water could be found, which plants were safe, and which trails led to shelter. Their memories built maps that existed not on paper, but in the stories shared around quiet fires. People rarely felt lost. They trusted the signs around them: the shape of hills, the direction of rivers, the behavior of birds. The earth offered clues everywhere, and those who walked it learned to listen closely. Migration was less about wandering and more about following the natural patterns woven into the environment. By moving across continents in this gradual rhythm, humans carried with them knowledge, resilience, and the quiet determination that had shaped their survival for generations. Their migrations weren't grand events. They were simple, patient journeys guided by nature's unfolding design. As groups moved farther from their familiar homelands, they encountered landscapes shaped by the melting world: wide grasslands, forests still young, and river valleys carved out by retreating ice. These new environments required quiet observation. People learned where the land dipped, where it rose, and where it gathered water after rains. Travel wasn't rushed. It unfolded slowly, shaped by the needs of every member of the group and the signals offered by the land itself. Sometimes migrations stretched across many seasons. A family might leave a valley during spring, cross plains through summer, shelter near rivers in autumn, and adjust their path in winter depending on conditions. Each season taught them something new: winds that changed direction, plants that appeared at different times, animals that followed subtle patterns. These lessons shaped decisions with a calm consistency that kept the journey steady. If your mind begins to drift here, that's perfectly all right. These small details are meant to settle gently, the same way footsteps settle into soft earth. You don't need to hold on tightly, just let the rhythm guide you. As they traveled, people occasionally returned to places they had visited years before: a familiar hill, a bend in a river, a clearing that once offered shelter. These moments of recognition created a quiet sense of comfort. Even across long distances, the land offered touch points that grounded their memories, helping them navigate without maps or written guides. In certain regions, migrations brought different groups together. Two bands crossing the same plains might stop to share information: where water flowed more reliably, which direction herds had moved, or which valleys offered safe resting places. These exchanges were peaceful, built on mutual respect shaped by shared challenges. Cooperation made the journey safer and more predictable for everyone. With each generation, migrations became part of identity. Children grew up learning the pathways from stories told beside evening fires. They traced routes with their fingers in the dirt, listened to elders describe distant hills, and memorized the shapes of clouds that hinted at weather patterns. For them, movement wasn't a burden. It was the natural expression of life in a world shaped by change. During long stretches of travel, the group often walked in a relaxed line, each person adjusting their pace to those around them. Elders moved steadily, children paused to observe insects or stones, and adults carried tools and supplies. The sound of their footsteps blended with wind sweeping across plains, creating a calm rhythm that soothed even the longest days. If you feel your thoughts soften here, allow them to. These migrations flowed just as gently, never demanding strict attention, always unfolding at the pace of nature. Some regions required careful navigation. Dense forests forced travelers to weave among trees, listening to birds and distant movements for clues. Mountain passes demanded patience, especially when melting snow created slippery paths. People developed quiet strategies, traveling earlier in the day, resting before the steepest climbs, and observing animal tracks to find safer routes. In these varied landscapes, families found temporary shelters, sometimes caves shaped by ancient wind, sometimes clusters of trees that offered shade, sometimes gentle slopes that protected them from storms. They built fires, prepared food, and rested with the knowledge that tomorrow's path would reveal itself through signs in the land. As migrations continued across continents, people embraced new opportunities. Rivers led them to fertile valleys. Open plains guided them toward abundant game. Forest edges offered wood and plants they had not seen before. With each discovery, they adapted tools, adjusted routines, and expanded their understanding of the world. Travel didn't always lead to permanent settlement, but it expanded human reach gently and steadily. People didn't conquer land, the land guided them. Through wind, water, and shifting seasons, they found new homes, new routes, and new ways of living suited to the warming world. And in this slow, unhurried movement, humanity connected distant regions long before maps existed. One careful step at a time, shaped by patience, resilience, and deep trust in the signs woven into the earth. Across the world of the Ice Age, vast landscapes once stretched beneath the feet of early humans, landscapes so immense and open that they seemed unending. These were places shaped by cold winds, frozen rivers, and plains carved by ancient glacier. Yet many of these regions no longer exist. They were submerged, reshaped, or softened into entirely new forms as the world warmed. Imagining these vanished lands invites us into a quiet reflection on how much the Earth can change over long spans of time. During the coldest periods, coastlines reached far beyond where modern shores sit today. People walked across open land that now lies hidden under deep ocean waters. They hunted and gathered on plains that connected regions which are now separated by seas. The melting ice slowly raised water levels, covering these familiar spaces inch by inch. The change wasn't sudden. It unfolded gently, unnoticed from one generation to the next. If your thoughts begin to drift, let them. These slow transformations mirror the rhythm of the story, steady, patient, shaped by time rather than urgency. Imagine families living on what is now the ocean floor. Their shelters, made from wood, stone, and hides, once stood on firm ground. Their fires crackled beneath open skies. They fished in shallow waters that later deepened into vast seas. Over thousands of years, these coastlines shifted inward, swallowing the places where people once stood, turning familiar ground into ancient memories held only by the earth itself. Some regions were land bridges, wide passages of earth connecting continents. Early humans used these areas as natural highways, crossing between lands that today require boats or aircraft. These bridges weren't narrow or dangerous. They were broad stretches of tundra and grassland, rich with migrating animals and seasonal plants. As sea levels rose, these connections disappeared beneath waves, gently separating lands that had once shared ecosystems. Picture a valley shaped by enormous glacier, its edges steep and defined. As the world warmed, those glacier melted, leaving behind lakes, rolling hills, and fertile soil. What had once been a frozen corridor became a lush environment full of life. The original shape of the land faded as forests grew and waters carved new paths. People who lived through this shift learned to reinterpret their surroundings with each passing season. Sometimes, families returned to places they believed unchanged, only to find the land transformed. A familiar path might be flooded. A river once narrow might have widened. Hills that once overlooked plains might now face forests. These changes weren't frightening. They were simply part of the natural cycle they had known since birth. The earth moved at its own pace, and the people adapted naturally. If you feel yourself relaxing with these images, let that feeling deepen. The changes of the Ice Age world invite a softer kind of attention, one that doesn't require effort, only quiet imagination. Some ancient lakes formed from melting glacier stretched across miles of wilderness, offering fresh water, fish, and shelter. Over time, many of these lakes drained or split into smaller bodies of water, leaving behind rich soil that supported new plant life. What once held deep, cold water later became fields, forests, or valleys shaped by rivers. The landscape carried its own memory through these layers of transformation. In other places, plains expanded into areas previously hidden beneath ice sheets. People stepped into these newly revealed lands with wonder, exploring fresh terrain filled with opportunities. But as the climate continued its warming trend, these plains gradually changed again, becoming forests, wetlands, or gently rolling hills. The earth rarely remained the same for long. Early humans didn't resist these changes. They accepted them as part of the world's natural balance. When water rose, they moved. When forests grew, they learned to navigate them. When rivers changed course, they adjusted their camps and continued forward. Their connection to the land allowed them to understand these shifts not as losses, but as transitions. Imagine walking across a region that will one day be unrecognizable. The people didn't know their world would transform so drastically in the future. They simply lived in the moment, tracking animals, gathering plants, tending fires, and guiding their families. Their footsteps rested lightly on terrain that would soon become something else entirely. Some of these ancient landscapes now lie hundreds of meters below modern oceans. Others survive only in faint geological hints, patterns in soil, buried riverbeds, or ancient sediment layers. What remains is not the land itself, but the knowledge that the world is always changing, always reshaping its own form with quiet persistence. If your mind softens here, that's completely fine. Let the idea of a shifting earth calm you, the same way early humans were calmed by observing the gentle, ongoing changes around them. These vanished lands remind us that nothing in nature stays fixed. Plains become forests. Coasts become seas. Ice becomes water. Through every shift, people adjusted with patience and humility, trusting the natural order that shaped their lives. As water continued to rise and ice retreated farther north, entire regions slowly shifted into new identities. A valley that once echoed with the sound of footsteps and crackling fires might, over generations, transform into a deep inlet filled with seawater. People watched these changes unfold gradually, noticing how each season brought subtle adjustments, shorelines creeping inward, riverbanks widening, and wetlands forming where dry grass once grew. Nothing happened overnight. Time reshaped the world with the same calm patience it always carried. For communities living through these transformations, the land felt alive. They saw how melting snow fed streams, how lakes spilled into new channels, and how the soil softened as temperatures warmed. These changes didn't frighten them. They simply encouraged exploration. People walked along fresh coastlines, tested new paths, and learned which areas remained safe during seasonal floods. Their understanding of the world expanded with every journey through these evolving landscapes. If your thoughts drift while imagining these scenes, allow them to. The slow reshaping of the earth invites a gentler kind of focus, one that moves at the pace of nature rather than expectation. Some regions offered signs of transformation long before they fully changed. Cracks formed along the edges of cliffs. Frozen marshes began to thaw earlier each spring. Herds traveled differently, choosing routes that hinted at future river valleys. People observed these clues carefully. Their survival depended on recognizing small patterns, reading the ground, and listening to the wind. These early warnings helped them prepare for shifts long before they unfolded completely. In certain parts of the world, glacial meltwater carved enormous paths through rock and soil, creating canyons and channels still visible today. Early humans witnessed the first stages of these formations, streams widening into rivers, rivers cutting deeper into the land, water shaping stone with steady pressure. They may not have understood the full geological story, but they felt the power of moving water and adjusted their lives to its presence. As the warming world reshaped terrain, forests spread into places previously too cold to support trees. What had once been barren tundra gradually filled with life, birds nesting in branches, animals seeking shade, and plants covering the ground in soft layers. People who returned to these areas after a few generations sometimes found the land unrecognizable. Familiar landmarks disappeared beneath roots, leaves, and new growth. You can let your mind rest here if you like. These quiet transformations carry their own softness, shifts that ask nothing of you but to notice them gently. Some ancient hunting grounds became lakes. Some lakes drained into plains. Some plains became forests, then grasslands, then forests again. The land moved in cycles, and communities learned to flow with these cycles. They did not expect permanence, they expected change. This perspective allowed them to remain steady even as the world around them transformed. On certain coastlines, rising water covered the earliest human camps, sealing them beneath layers of sand and silt. These submerged sites remain hidden today, preserved under calm ocean floors. They hold stories of meals cooked beside ancient fires, tools shaped with care, and shelters built against cold winds. Though unseen, these places still exist in the Earth's memory, waiting quietly beneath the waves. Gradually, people formed new relationships with the transformed land. They learned which forests offered the best wood, which valleys held edible plants, and which coasts provided safe fishing grounds. These discoveries shaped new traditions and new routes, guiding communities toward a future built on the foundation of an ever-changing world. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, families sat together and spoke of places they once lived, regions now underwater or reshaped beyond recognition. Their words carried no sorrow, only reflection. They knew that the land had shifted many times before and would shift again. What mattered was their ability to observe, adapt, and move with the changing earth. And as these landscapes faded from the surface, they lived on in memory, in stories shared across generations, and in the gentle traces left beneath soil and sea. Early humans didn't see these places as lost. They saw them as chapters in a long story written by the natural world, a story they were privileged to witness as they walked across continents. As the Ice Age gradually released its hold on the world, the people who lived through it didn't vanish. Their ways of life didn't end abruptly, nor were they erased by time. Instead, their cultures shifted gently, reshaping themselves the way rivers carve new paths or forests grow where glacier once stood. What looked like disappearance from afar was, in truth, a slow evolution. Traditions, skills, and knowledge changed shape, adapting to the warmer lands that emerged around them. These communities began to notice that the world no longer demanded the same strategies for survival. Winters softened. Plants grew in greater variety. Animals moved into new territories. With each change, people adjusted their routines. Tools evolved, shelters transformed, and daily habits shifted from cold-focused survival to a more balanced rhythm shaped by multiple seasons. Nothing was lost suddenly. Everything flowed naturally from one form into another. If your thoughts drift as you imagine this transition, let them. The evolution of Ice Age cultures was gentle, meant to unfold quietly rather than grab attention. You can let the narrative move at its own pace. Families who had once relied heavily on hunting large, cold-adapted animals began gathering more plants and hunting smaller game. Their diets diversified, offering greater stability throughout the year. This shift didn't require abandoning old skills. Instead, it laid new knowledge on top of existing traditions. Every generation carried forward pieces of the past while embracing the opportunities of a warmer world. Clothing changed too. Heavy furs designed for deep cold became less essential. People adapted by crafting lighter garments from softened hides and woven plant fibers. These materials offered comfort during warmer seasons while still providing protection when temperatures dipped. Their craftsmanship grew more refined, reflecting both experience and the new resources available in their expanding environment. As landscapes shifted, communities reorganized their settlements. Instead of moving frequently across frozen plains, many groups began forming longer-term camps near rivers, forests, and valleys rich with diverse plants and animals. These camps didn't resemble permanent villages yet, but they hinted at a growing sense of place. People learned the rhythms of local land in deeper ways, recognizing which areas offered abundant food and which were better suited for seasonal rest. Over time, the social fabric of these communities evolved. Cooperative tasks expanded. Families shared responsibilities more evenly across seasons. Older members passed down knowledge not only about survival in cold climates but also about navigating forests, lakes, and warmer plains. Younger generations absorbed both worlds, blending old wisdom with new experiences. If you feel yourself softening into the story, allow that ease. These cultural shifts weren't abrupt transitions. They were like gentle waves reshaping a shoreline. Tools also took on new forms. Stone blades were sharpened differently for cutting wood rather than frozen hide. Baskets were woven for gathering berries and roots. Fishing equipment became more common as rivers flowed more reliably. Each adaptation reflected a deepening relationship with the changing land, showing that culture flourishes when people pay attention to their surroundings. Even their movement patterns evolved. Instead of long migrations tied strictly to the behavior of massive herds, people traveled based on the availability of plants, smaller animals, and safe water sources. These shorter, more flexible journeys connected a network of familiar places, creating regional identities shaped by shared landscapes. The stories they told around quiet fires adapted as well. Instead of focusing solely on endurance through cold, they spoke of new territories explored, new foods discovered, and new challenges faced. These were practical stories, observations meant to guide children and reassure them that change was natural, expected, and manageable. As climates continued to shift, people found themselves becoming stewards of specific areas. They learned how to track the growth of plants, how to read patterns in flowing water, and how to interpret animal movements that signaled seasonal shifts. This deeper engagement with the land strengthened their connection to it, giving rise to new forms of knowledge that carried forward into future eras. Sometimes, families passed by places their ancestors once camped, now transformed beyond recognition. Instead of feeling loss, they felt a gentle acceptance. They understood that the world had always been in motion, always reshaping its form. Their own culture followed the same pattern, changing, adapting, and growing with each generation. Through these subtle shifts, early humans didn't disappear, they evolved. Their identities stretched, absorbed new lessons, and expanded across landscapes that welcomed life in new forms. Their cultural transformation became the foundation for societies that would follow long after the Ice Age ended. As generations passed, the skills honed during the Ice Age blended seamlessly with new discoveries. People who once relied almost entirely on hunting large animals now became experts at reading a wider landscape, identifying edible plants, crafting tools for fishing, and learning how rivers could guide them to safer, richer regions. Their evolving abilities did not erase the past, they expanded upon it. Each skill added became another thread woven into the growing tapestry of their culture. Communities formed deeper connections through shared experiences in changing environments. The elders, who remembered the coldest years, passed down wisdom about seasons, patience, and careful observation. Younger generations, raised in warmer climates, contributed new knowledge about diverse plants and smaller game. Together, they created an interwoven understanding of survival that honored both past and present. This blending became a bridge between eras. If your mind softens here, let it. Cultural evolution, like the warming earth, moved gently, nothing forced, nothing hurried. As people settled more frequently near water, new traditions emerged. Fishing techniques grew more efficient, and tools became specialized. Gathering plants became a communal activity, allowing families to teach one another which roots were safe, which leaves had uses, and which berries appeared only in certain months. These shared tasks strengthened social bonds and shaped group identity more firmly than long migrations ever had. Over time, communities developed preferences for certain landscapes, protective valleys, fertile lakesides, or forest edges rich with animals and materials. These places became centers of activity, influencing the stories people told, the tools they crafted, and the rhythms of their lives. A sense of belonging began to form, built not on ownership but on familiarity with the land that supported them through each season. As tools diversified, craftsmanship deepened. People shaped finer stone blades, carved wooden handles with more precision, and experimented with natural fibers to create stronger bindings. These improvements were not about innovation for its own sake. They simply reflected the evolving challenges and opportunities of a changing world. Quietly, culture became more layered. Every few minutes, allow yourself to drift with the calmness of their progression. These people walk through centuries of change with steady intention, adapting without losing their grounding. Trade-like exchanges emerged naturally when groups met at shared foraging grounds or river crossings. They exchanged materials, stone from one region, plant fibers from another, and shared knowledge that enriched both sides. These interactions strengthened relationships and encouraged cooperation, shaping broader cultural networks long before formal systems existed. As warming continued, early humans discovered new patterns in animal behavior. Smaller animals thrived in diverse environments, and people learned to track them through forest floors, riverbanks, and open grasslands. This new form of hunting required different skills, quieter footsteps, lighter tools, and a deeper awareness of subtle movements. These lessons shaped children from an early age, strengthening their connection to the land's changing rhythms. Communities also created new seasonal routines. Instead of long migrations, they organized smaller movements within familiar territories, moving slightly uphill in warmer months, closer to rivers when food was abundant, or into sheltered areas before cold nights. These manageable shifts formed the early foundations of regional cultures built around specific landscapes. As centuries unfolded, the memory of the coldest Ice Age years transformed into knowledge. People shared stories not as myths or legends, but as practical recollections. How ancestors survived bitter winters, how they tracked massive animals, how they adapted when the world shifted. These reflections helped young people understand the resilience that shaped their lineage. If you feel yourself drifting, allow that ease to deepen. These cultural shifts were never marked by sudden turning points. They were like the slow, steady growth of a tree, expanding quietly each season. Eventually, early humans found themselves living in environments richer than any before. Forests offered wood, rivers offered fish, and plains offered smaller game. With each new resource, traditions grew more complex, skills more diverse, and communities more interconnected. They carried the essence of Ice Age life within them, its patience, its adaptability, its rhythm, even as their world transformed. And so, Ice Age cultures did not disappear. They evolved, expanded, and unfolded into the foundations of future societies. Their legacy lived not in monuments or preserved structures, but in the knowledge passed from hand to hand, the quiet resilience embedded in each generation, and the deep relationship they maintained with the land that shaped them. Across thousands of years, the people of the Ice Age passed quietly through history, leaving behind traces far subtler than grand structures or written records. Their legacy lives instead in the rhythm of daily survival, in the skills they refined, and in the ways they adapted to a world in constant motion. These early humans didn't set out to create a legacy. They simply lived, observed, learned, and taught. Yet through these modest actions, they shaped the future of every generation that followed. When we imagine their lives, we see small fires glowing beneath wide skies, simple tools held in skilled hands, and families huddled together against shifting climates. They moved with patience, guided by the signs of the earth, the migration of animals, the growth of plants, the flow of rivers. In their calm responses to change, they built the foundation of human resilience. Their legacy is made of moments rather than monuments. If your thoughts begin to drift, let them. The legacy of these people is best understood not through sharp focus, but through a soft awareness, just as their presence settled gently into the land. Consider the knowledge they carried across continents. How to read the shape of clouds for approaching storms. How to track animals by the faintest prints. How to craft tools from stone, bone, and wood. This practical wisdom wasn't recorded in books. It was held in memory, passed from elder to child, from one season to the next. Over generations, these teachings formed the first threads of human tradition. Their legacy also rests in the way they lived with the land rather than against it. They understood that the world provided resources through the natural order established by the one who governs all things. They took only what they needed and moved gently, allowing ecosystems to recover. This respectful relationship with the earth became a model for sustainable living long before the concept existed. As the climate changed, their legacy deepened. Instead of resisting new landscapes, they embraced them. Forests, rivers, and grasslands each taught different lessons. Families learned new plants, new animals, new building materials, and new techniques for survival. Their willingness to adapt became a powerful inheritance, one that guided humanity long after the ice retreated. If you feel a sense of calm settling in, allow it to deepen. The story of these early people carries a peaceful simplicity, reminding us that strength does not always come from force. Sometimes it comes from patience, observation, and quiet determination. Their legacy can also be found in the migrations that carried them across continents. Each path taken, each shelter built, each river crossed left a subtle imprint on future generations. These journeys allowed humans to populate vast regions, spread diverse knowledge, and develop cultures shaped by distinct environments. What began as small steps eventually connected distant lands through shared human experience. Think of the skills refined over thousands of years, shaping stone blades, weaving fibers, building shelters that adapted to weather, gathering edible plants, and understanding seasonal cycles. These were not inventions of a single moment. They were the result of countless hands learning through trial, practice, and patient repetition. Their mastery formed the earliest chapters of human ingenuity. Their legacy also lives in how they taught each other. Instruction didn't rely on formal structure. It arose naturally in daily tasks. Children learned by watching adults work with purpose, listening to quiet explanations, and participating at their own pace. This gentle teaching style fostered strong bonds, ensuring that crucial knowledge never faded. Even in moments of hardship, these early people carried themselves with steadiness. They faced shifting climates, disappearing animals, and unfamiliar terrain, yet they endured through cooperation and adaptability. Their resilience became a blueprint for humanity's future challenges. If your mind softens with these reflections, that's completely fine. Their story invites the softness, the kind that helps you settle into rest the same way they settled into each new environment with calm acceptance. Through quiet actions and steady survival, the Ice Age people shaped human history in ways still felt today. Their legacy isn't grand or loud. It's woven into the simplest parts of human life: shared knowledge, communal effort, and the ability to adapt with patience and humility. As the world continued to warm and forests spread across regions once shaped by ice, early humans carried forward traditions that blended old and new. They refined their understanding of the land year after year, learning how different seasons shaped the growth of plants and animals. Their evolving knowledge created continuity across generations, forming a quiet chain that linked distant eras together. What they taught in simple moments, how to read weather, how to craft tools, how to care for one another, became the groundwork for all future societies. Some of their legacy rests in the very landscapes they once walked. Paths carved by generations of footsteps later became natural routes for others. Waterways they followed turned into gathering places for communities in warmer ages. Valleys they chose for shelter eventually supported settlements that grew into future towns. Though they left no permanent structures, their movement shaped subtle patterns that continued long after their own journeys ended. If your thoughts soften here, let them. The legacy of these people is felt most clearly in the quiet spaces between details, in the steady, patient rhythm that shaped their lives. Their legacy can also be seen in the resilience passed from parent to child. Each generation learned to adapt to new challenges, whether those challenges came in the form of shifting climates, changing food sources, or unfamiliar landscapes. Their ability to adjust with calm determination became a defining trait of humanity, allowing future generations to thrive in environments far different from the frozen plains of their ancestors. During gatherings around evening fires, stories carried memories forward. These stories weren't elaborate myths. They were reflections, reminders of how people had navigated the coldest years and how they adapted as the world changed. These conversations offered comfort, guidance, and a sense of connection to those who walked before them. Through shared memory, their legacy lived not in stone or wood, but in words and lessons carried by the heart. As the land transformed, humans transformed with it. Communities became more rooted. Travel became more selective. New materials, new techniques, and new environments shaped emerging ways of life. Yet beneath all these changes, the calm resilience of Ice Age people remained. It whispered through generations, guiding decisions, shaping values, and offering steady confidence in the face of an ever-changing world. Let yourself rest in that idea for a moment. Their story isn't loud. It moves like a quiet current beneath the surface, steady enough to guide, gentle enough to soothe. Even today, fragments of their legacy appear in unexpected ways. The way people observe nature, the way families pass down skills, the way communities organize themselves for cooperation. These echoes trace back to ancestors who lived without written language or permanent cities, yet whose patient adaptation shaped all that followed. If you feel yourself drifting, that's perfectly fine. Their legacy is meant to be felt softly, not studied intensely. Their quiet endurance reminds us that human strength doesn't always come from grand achievements. Sometimes it comes from small acts repeated over generations, teaching a child how to track an animal, repairing a shelter with steady hands, sharing food during harsh seasons, or simply watching the sky to understand tomorrow's weather. Through these gentle actions, the Ice Age people left behind something far more lasting than monuments. They left a way of being, observant, resilient, humbled before the natural world, yet confident in the skills they carried. And so, as the final traces of the Ice Age faded and new civilizations began to form, their influence remained. Not in physical form, but in the living knowledge carried by every generation that followed. Their legacy continues in the quiet strength that flows through humanity today. Take a deep breath here, allowing the calm of their story to settle. Let the rhythm of their journey rest gently in your mind. Thank you for listening to this story tonight. Your time, your presence, and your quiet attention mean so much. May this gentle journey through the past bring you peace, rest, and comfort. Wishing you a calm and restful sleep.